So to begin, someone asked, as a very protective parent, this entire application process so far has been very emotional. How have your parents and families handled you going abroad? So I can talk about this slightly. So my parents were also very protective, and I've only traveled with them. And before going to Korea, my last time going abroad with my parents was probably like 7, 8 years ago. So it's been a while since I traveled, and Korea was like something I had no idea what it was going to be like, even though I had help from alumni. Being there on your own is completely different. But I think just the structure of NSLI and the fact that it's funded by the State Department, it has so much investment in your well-being and your safety. And I think that is very transparent. And from the start, like, you build community, you make friends that have each other's back. On program in Korea, we had a phone that we had to keep on us at all times. It had to be fully charged. So any moment of the day, your resident directors could call you and check up on you. And you would also have everyone's contact information. So you could call up a friend wherever you went. So I think the aura of safety was there. And he had so many people you could reach out to if you needed help. So I personally never felt unsafe in Korea. And I think it's very natural for you going to a new place to feel insecure. And I think that's a part of the process. But I think just reminding yourself that you're going to be along with, depending on the program, 20, 30, 40 people who are going through the same thing. You're going to have your teachers, your host family. So you're going to have so many barriers of protection that really make you feel at home in your host country. I don't know if anyone would like to add to that.
Yeah, I can kind of chime in on that. So my parents were also a little worried because I originally applied for like the Mandarin program, so that could have been like mainland China or Taiwan. And they don't speak a single word of Mandarin. They don't know anything about the culture. They've never been there. So I think one of the big things that let me apply in the first place was that NSLI is sponsored by the United States Department of State. And I think with that is kind of like, not like, it's more like showing like the safety of the program. And it's also been a program that's been around for a couple of years now. So a lot of past people have gone on the programs, and we can see like on NSLI Interactive, like their experiences that really like calmed my parents down, but also on location within, I believe, like the first week we went to an American like diplomatic office in Taiwan. So they also gave us like a safety briefing at the orientation. There was a large emphasis on talking about safety. The parents were contacted often, just with even just like pictures or things that were going on in the program. So I think the communication aspect was something that made my parents like really happy about the NSLI program, because they knew even if I wasn't necessarily calling them every single day while I was like busy with my school and like the time difference, they still got to know like what was going on in the program, things about like just our excursions or class days. And I think that all is very helpful.
Just adding on to that, so as I mentioned before, I had a pretty extreme case of my family being against me going abroad on NSLI. And the first time, though I'd won a scholarship to study in Jordan, they actually made me reject it. And so I had to go through the application process again to win a scholarship from Morocco. But I did find several facts and key points relieved them of their worries a lot, such as the fact that NSLI is a program sponsored by the U.S. Department of State, as Hassan said. So it's legit. And I found that going throughout the program, staying in contact with my parents really helped them a lot as well. I tried to call them at least maybe twice a week through the phone that NSLI provided us. And NSLI was also extremely helpful in terms of communicating with our parents. Even if I didn't necessarily get emails from them, they apparently got tons of emails from NSLI themselves explaining what we were doing, where we were, and all the little details that could put their users at rest. So.
All right, so another question that we received was, for those alumni who are beginners in their target language, how did you deal with not being able to understand what your host family was saying, if that was an occurrence? And did you use translator apps, or was there a different method that you found to be effective as well? So personally, I went into the program. So before you start program, you have about 5 weeks, at least on in my experience, is about 5 weeks of like pre-language, pre-programmed language assignments that you have to do to try and get you like prepared for these like beginning interactions where you don't have a ton of language, but you still want to be able to communicate, for example, with your host family. Even though with that, yeah, I was definitely still very much a beginner in the language and did not have a lot of experience with it. So in my host family, they spoke some English and then with me being able to speak some Korean, we kind of, Konglish is what it's called when you like combine like Korean and English. So we were able to kind of like use that to get our points across. I think something that we really emphasized in our family, in our host family, was like you can communicate even without like you can communicate non-verbally. Like even if I couldn't like even if I didn't have the Korean words like to explain what I was trying to say, like there's still different ways you can demonstrate that. Like if they are like, oh, are you hungry? This, for example, was a question that they would want to ask. Like bringing food over and being like, offering you a plate would be one way to like show that. But also, like since my host family did speak English, especially some English at the beginning of the program, they did really focus on, okay, like what can we speak to you in English that's like I guess the bare like what to like communicate effectively and make sure there aren't any misunderstandings. But also, yes, we did use translator apps, and I know some of my friends who were in families that did not speak English at all or like very limited, they relied a lot on translator apps and just like I mentioned earlier, nonverbal communication.
Yeah, and to like piggyback off of that, I was also in Seoul, South Korea, and I was I tested into as a novice beginner, and for me, I had a host sister, a host father, and a host mother. I could kind of communicate with my host sister the best. The next level was like my host father. We could sometimes communicate. But for my host mother, it seemed like the whole program, I never understood anything she said. And I don't know why, but that's just how it was. But we ended up having a really good relationship, even though I really could not understand her and she didn't speak English at all. And we were able to develop that relationship, as Katie said, through like nonverbal communication, just eating meals together, as well as like me working on my homework with her, us like discussing specific things that I had learned and that I knew that I would be able to understand. So yeah, just like doing homework and like assignments with my host mother. In Korea, one of our assignments was like to do like a little role play. So I did that with my host mom and my host sister. So it was really nice to just be able to communicate in that way. Like even if it was through like assignments, it was still a good way to build our relationship.
To go off of what some of the other students have said, nonverbal communication and just like generally being lost at the beginning of the program is totally normal, and it's something that everyone goes through. Having really weird like communication issues, you know, saying dumb things and like laughing about it is totally normal, and you end up learning a lot from it. In my first NSLI program, I was a complete beginner, and I had 4 young host siblings who were all under the age of 8, and they didn't speak much English at all, so they would just like speak to me in Arabic and want me to play with them and stuff. And that was honestly the best experience for my language, because they didn't realize, or they didn't give consideration of being a foreigner who didn't speak the language, so they just expected me to respond like a functioning human being, which I couldn't do at the time. So that really helped me, like it forced me to like learn the language much faster, or at least be able to communicate with them much faster. So even though it seems very overwhelming to go into an environment where you don't know the language at all, just know that the miscommunications are part of the learning process, and you'll come out of it with so much more than before. And to briefly touch on one of the questions about language proficiency, like how much your proficiency in your target language improves, it kind of depends on where you start off, because as you get into into advanced levels of most languages, it becomes harder and harder to progress because the difference between each level is increased. But on the NSLI website, I think under Alumni Insights or something, you can find some charts that show the oral proficiency interview averages for each program, like based on summer and academic year programs, and there are some sort of averages about the general improvement, so that can give you a good idea of how much the typical NSLI student would improve. And obviously at the beginning levels, and if you're starting off as a complete beginner, you can expect to make a lot of progress during your summer or academic year program. And then if you're at an advanced level, you would definitely be progressing, but slower depending on, you know, where you started.
Just to go back to the question about not being able to communicate with your host family, I found that in Morocco, you couldn't really use translator apps at all because they speak Darija, which is a very specific dialect of Arabic. So Google Translate didn't have that component in it. But what I found to be extremely useful for me, at least, was making friends who spoke Arabic and maybe a little bit of English too, and asking them about the common greetings that people would say, or just the basic phrases people would use every day. And I also found it extremely helpful to learn certain phrases such as, how do you say, or could you repeat this more slowly, please, in the target language you're trying to learn. And once you have that down, that enables you to ask a lot more questions about how to say certain things. Like once you have a friend who can speak a little bit of English, a little bit of Arabic, and you have those questions, you can ask them, oh, how do I say blah, 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 blah. And you can really go far with that, and go very far.
Thank you, Ryan. And then moving on to some other questions. Have you ever participated in abroad programs before NSLI, and do you still keep in touch with the people you met? And to link that question with what was your favorite word or phrase in the language you were learning on your NSLI program? So to respond to the first part, as I mentioned before, one of my favorite parts of NSLI is the community. I mentioned before that I got to spend my summer, or part of my summer, with Lois. Whenever people are visiting New York, where I live, they always hit me up and like we get dinner or something. Just last semester, my friend Damari was also visiting New York, and I had to have food with her. So we're in constant communication with people, and I think the bonds you form are really long-lasting. And my favorite word or phrase in Korean was definitely "깎아주세요," which just means "give me a discount, please." I don't know if anyone else would like to share their favorite phrase.
My favorite phrase was 给我一杯珍珠奶茶, which was like, give me a cup of bubble tea. And that was a pretty big one at like night markets.
At least for me, I found myself saying "Hadjibanin bazef," which is "this is so delicious" in Arabic, Darija, to my host mom a lot. Every meal I would say that, and she would just beam up in the brightest smile. So I love that.
For me, my favorite phrase in Jordan was "ewa," which basically means like exactly, or it's like a emphatic yes, and my host parents would say that if I got a word right, or just to like encourage me. And it was just like the word that people say when like you're partying and dancing and you just repeat it. So that was like my favorite word. And in Darija, I'm still looking for one specific favorite word, but in general, Darija, I love Darija, but still looking for that one word.
I love Darija too.
All right, everyone. It's about 6 Eastern now, which means that our webinar is coming to an end. And I know many of our questions were left unanswered, so some of the panelists will share our contact information into the chat. I'll share mine personally. So if you want to reach out for anything at all, I went to Summer Seoul, Korea 2 years ago. I can provide info on that, and you heard what programs other people did. So please reach out to us. We're happy to help. And lastly, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope this panel helps future students pursue cultural exchange while balancing different identities and backgrounds. We encourage you to interact with us on social media. You can find us on our website, nsli4youth.org. You can read more or submit your own story at nsli-interactive.org. Also, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and that is all NSLI, which is NSLI-Y. So the application for the 2020 to 2021 NSLI program cycle has now closed. But we strongly encourage you to apply to the NSLI program if you haven't already, when the application reopens next August. If you have already applied or are interested, a parent or educator, we encourage you to share about the program within your local schools and networks. For any current students or alumni, if the topics discussed tonight resonate with your own experiences on programs, we highly encourage you to share your story with us on NSLIinteractive.org. So thank you so much, everyone, again. Again, our contact information is in the chat. Feel free to reach out to us, and we really hope you enjoyed this webinar. I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.